Everybody thinks of my house anyway.
You guys let me know when you're ready.
Oh, you was just shooting the message.
Yeah. Harry?
I'll leave it.
Harry? Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm on,
Yeah, because if you can't hear me say your name twice, you're not concentrating enough to listen to the training.
Sorry, I was standing out there.
Yeah, all good. Okay, so we had our audit done in September. That's our 3-yearly audit, which I think is triennial. Is that correct, Bill? You'd be the one that knows about that.
Triennial.
Triennial
Yeah.
versus every 3 times a year. Is that triennial?
Not tri-year, it'd be triennial. Triennial would be the correct grammar.
Oh,
Right. So anyway, and that was quite comprehensive. We used to have, the last one we had BDO do it. They obviously specialise in audits, but not in AML. So there was a lot that this audit's turned up needs adjustment. So today we're going through the audit findings, which will be pretty quick. The risk assessment update. So as you'll be aware, we've got our risk assessment and then we've got our compliance program. The compliance program is more about how we do our everyday stuff. Our risk assessment is establishing our practices and our risk based off those. So we're going to go through AML review form, our PP checks, our client profiles, our source of wealth and funds, our client risk assessment, and red flags. So our AML audit conducted by AML partners, they went through our risk assessment, our compliance program, our records of every single property that we've conducted AML on in the last 3 years. They went onto Property Suite and looked at every single document to audit that it was correct, and our nature and purpose. They look at timeframes, every single thing they looked at. So out of the 32 areas that they assessed, I won't go through it into too much detail, but out of both our risk assessment and our compliance schedule, there were 18 areas that were compliant and good, 5 areas that we predominantly meet, so need slight adjustments, or it might be minor wording or things in our policies or our risk assessment. 3 partially meet, so maybe we're getting about halfway, and 6 we don't meet. So this is obviously where we have to do the most work. A lot of that is in the background for me to be changing. Some of it I've already been changing and you might have noticed, or the changes that we're introducing to you today. I'm going to split this up. This is going to be the bulk of the training, and then we will have to do another one with some small changes, so you're aware of changes that have taken place in the background, but you're not necessarily going to have to be making, changes to the way you do things as well. So things we're having to have updated in the risk assessment was just the staff numbers and locations that were detailed. Updating the countries of the clients we've dealt with in the last 12 months. So that had to incorporate Austria and Italy. We haven't had any clients that were from China. So it's just making some adjustments to reflect what is actually accurate in our business. Noting that the new government may encourage overseas investments, and noted to be aware on that might change our risk profile if we've got more overseas people purchasing here long-term than selling. An update of the terminology from salespeople to agent or staff member. These bold ones are ones that we're going to have further slides on. So I'll get to those in a minute. Update on the percentages of products and services based off our last 12 months. So that's saying, 72% residential, etc. Update of non-face-to-face methods of verification. I'll get to that bold one in a minute. Expansion of types of customers and update percentages based off that. The countries dealt with, that's the addition of Italy and Austria. And having to update all the countries that we deal with on Know Your Country. Review of service providers and update of the schedule, which reflects our designated non-financial businesses risk assessment, which I have in here if anybody would like a copy of that. It's thrilling, as you be well aware, as it all is. So one of the main changes that you're going to find when we're doing AML now is that we are going to be required to have an AML review form. So yeah, you can cringe. I also cringe. The person cringing most is me, because to save you guys all a hell of a lot of time, I'm going to try and do most of it myself for you, because I'm aware that there's a lot of paperwork and everything, so I'm trying to reduce the load as much as possible. The way that we'll do that really is just chatting to me first off when you're having a listing coming on, so that I can be prepared and get this document underway. Because if they're quick turnaround timeframes, then that obviously impacts on my workload. Whereas if I know a few days before, then I can get it ready and we can go from there. So the purpose is having one document which details all the relevant information to do with the AML process that we undertook. So you can think of it like an expanded checklist that we're going through and filling it out. So it's all actually information that we gather anyway. It's just a way for us to record it that's in one place. So I'm envisioning, we've not used it before. I don't know in practice exactly how it's going to work. I wish I could tell you that, but I want to be flexible. If there's something on here that we find isn't working, I'm more than happy to amend it and adjust it and change it based off the way that we work. And it is a requirement to have AML signed off that one of these is done. So I've got steps to run through each bit. You'll see up here, we've got basic information. So it's your client name, the type of, is it a trust, is it a company, etc., their address, their details, what CDD documents we're getting, so the ID, etc. So the next one here, which is a bit of an adjustment, is a politically exposed person check. So we're not conducting specific PEP checks unless we thought that there was a reason that they might be a politically exposed person. So just a reminder, a politically exposed person is either a person or a family member or someone who has a close business ties to someone who is or has been within the last 12 months a prominent public function in an overseas country. So you're a council member in India, you're a, police captain in the UK. Things where you're going to be more susceptible to anti-money or money laundering pressure or bribery or things like that. So you will have probably noticed it if you've done any AML that I've been uploading some AML documents after you have been. The steps that I'm taking for this is to do a Google search of the full name and I review the first 7 pages of Google results to see if anything pops up that makes us think that they are related to someone somewhere. It's not that, it might not pick up everything, but apparently that is enough of a process that it should come up and flag it. So I now download that search result to a PDF and I upload it. So have you guys seen me do that yet, or have you clicked into it? I think I probably have done it for all of you so far. I've been doing it since September. We still have to have the PEP part checked, ticked and initialed on the agency agreement.
So it must be out of the country.
It's not New Zealand, yeah, that's right. So it's anyone overseas, not New Zealand. I don't know why. Maybe we've got stringent enough AML practices that they're not, we don't think the risk is high enough if they're political here. I don't actually know the reason why, and I don't like a gift horse in the mouth, as they say, Ellen. I just take that and move on. So the client profile section is one that I will need to confer with you on when we're putting it in here. As I said, I'm happy to do this. Also, if you wanted to this is a Word document, you can just type in the bare bones of it yourself and send it through to me, and then I can go from there. I don't really mind either way. It's just however anyone likes to work and when they're working. So the client profile section is all stuff that I think you'll mostly be getting an idea of anyway when you are listing a property or appraising a property. So questions like, what does the client do? Are they employed or self-employed? Their type of business? How long have they been employed or self-employed? What position do they hold? How old are they? Approx income, etc. So these questions here have two main purposes for us to be checking off, I guess. So the first one is, if a 20-year-old comes along to you, Diane, and they say to you, I own this $3 million property and I want to sell that, and you'll be like, oh, cool, like, good on you, that's a great property, and they just cagey about it. Or even if they're not cagey, actually, you think, how on earth is a 20-year-old got enough income that they've been able to purchase at some point a $3 million property to then resell it? So that in itself is a red flag, because we think the amount of income required for that, unless you know they're the son of a very wealthy family, they mention that they've inherited it, or etc., etc. So that's what we're trying to build here, is a bit of a picture, so it enables us to identify red flags or things that just don't sit right with what we know about their position. And the next thing that this document is going to do is, down the line, when a client has said to us, well, no, I've just got this one property and da-da-da, and then they come back to you 3 months later and say, oh, I've got another $600,000 property for you to sell. And you can think, that doesn't align with his job at Countdown that he told me about. How has he managed to sell, buy, get another however much property, da-da-da-da-da? So we've created a record of the information that we hold, because as AML, a sector that's required to do AML, that's part of our job. It's not just the one-off transaction. It's moving forward, providing evidence to the DIA or whoever that we've done enough to be able to pick up red flags. So that's the other thing to do with this. That's that. So the other big change, which a few of you have dealt with already, is the requirement for the source of wealth and source of funds. So that is somewhere that we didn't pass the requirements for. So I have made immediate changes with that. So we are required to determine the source of wealth and source of funds, the wealth being how a trust, if that's what the entity that you're doing the CDD on, how it's earned its income, and then how it got the funds in order to purchase the property that it owns. So they're two kind of separate things. One, how it's got its wealth, and then that specific property, how they've managed to fund it. So the enhanced due diligence, I'll get to that in a minute, but just a reminder, it's not only for trust, there are other things. So the options that we've got is we can outsource the trust AML to real AML, which includes the source of wealth and funds, and that's 95 plus just. So that will do the whole trust, it'll get the deed, it'll do the source of wealth and funds for each individual and what it needs to do. Getting a letter or letter from the solicitor or accountant pertaining to the source of wealth and funds. This is probably the least preferable option, but the easiest option, because usually with the trust, you're dealing with people that have some sort of contact with their lawyer. You know, they've had someone set it up at some point. And that can be a letter from the lawyer addressed to us saying that the way that the trust, for example, got its wealth and its funds, and that they believe that that would cover off our requirement for our source of wealth and funds. The CDD reliance form, which I've actually not covered that off in here, I don't think. I've just realised I've missed that slide, so I'll get to that. The other option, which is probably the least invasive option, but more of a grey area, and it can be a bit tricky to do, is gathering information that we have access to, or that the client's willing to provide, For example, Di, you had I think we ended up doing the lawyer one, but you had an older lady. They had, her and her husband's passed away. It was their family trust. They owned a farm out wherever it was, and we knew that they'd bought that farm in the 1950s, and so their wealth had gradually grown. The trust was set up solely for their, I'll just wait.
Sorry,
You're right.
it's Miss Nicole.
All good.
Eric Gregory.
The trust had been set up to look after their stuff, and so we could kind of step it out, and particularly if we've got access to the sales data and we can see, well, they bought it in 2002 for $150,000, but they sold that 10 years later for $1 million after whatever. So that can be an easy way to do it. Or they can provide us evidence like their IRD statements of their income, etc., etc. Which, again, the source of wealth and funds, it's the worst part of the whole AML, in my opinion. I think it's absolutely. I feel it's extremely invasive. I think, what right do I have to know how you've earned your income, where you've earned your income? That's why, although they're less preferable in terms of us completing our AML, the letter from the lawyer is good because we're not then necessarily getting all that information. Alternatively, the outsourcing it to real AML. And so that might just be that if it's a trust, you say, great, in order for us to get your AML stuff ticked off, it is going to be a charge of this much to go through. Is that all good?
Yeah, the bank hadn't sent it.
Oh, okay, good. I was starting to worry about that. So the other one is the CDD reliance form. So section 33 of the the AML legislation is that if let me just check I've not just done, no, I didn't. How have I got rid of that? Is that we are getting another entity, so that is required to do AML, so an accountant or a solicitor, to sign this document confirming that, yes, they're a reporting entity, yes, it already has a business relationship with the client, that it has conducted relevant customer due diligence procedures to at least the standard required by the Act, and that it can provide that verification information as soon as practical on request within 5 working days of such request. So what they're saying is, Cruikshank and Pride might have a trust that we've been dealing with, and they work with them, and they're signing this, their AML officer, and they are attesting to the fact that they hold the right information, it meets the Act, and that if we require it, they can give it to us within 5 working days. They don't have to, but this is a really great little form, particularly if it's a trust.
Is this what we took off of Megan the other day for Grant?
Yes. Yeah.
That's what, yeah.
Yeah. Bearing in mind, some clients, we had a commercial client, Dave and I'm not paying fucking rah to my lawyer to get this fucking form signed, da-da-da. So he instead sent us through a 40-page novel of all the properties he bought and sold and how much he sold them for over a period of time. Fine, if that's what you want to do. But bear in mind, the solicitors might charge the client for this. And they also probably need to have been dealing with them in the last few years actively to have the right information on file. But Grant, for example, you knew he'd been dealing with Megan lately, so that she would likely hold all the information. It was a bit of a nightmare, that one in particular, because there was trustees that needed to be removed and taken off, etc., etc. Really great solution that can simplify the process for us, and again, it's not invasive. So that's great. You do need to speak to me before doing this, because if it's some obscure solicitor in a place that I'm not able to verify, it's unlikely we're going to want to use it, because if it's some Auckland solicitor, they could just be me. We still have an obligation to make sure that we believe that that person providing it is trustworthy.
So if you get that done, as does that allow you to what?
That is your AML.
Right.
Yep, we'll still have to do one of these.
Mm-hmm. That's what you need to do.
That's basically the source of wealth, is it?
Well, no, it can be everything.
Can be everything.
So your client could have been dealing, because you know your solicitors, before they can do anything for you, they need to have you onboarded. So if you know your client's been dealing with them recently and you say, oh, did you give them your AML documentation? Yeah, they've got the whole thing
Already there.
already there. Then
But
they
mainly
can...
with trust, is it?
So you
No,
know,
not only with trust.
if we're
Even...
using that, there's no need even for a photograph, is it?
Yes, correct.
Oh,
Yep,
much
that's
better.
right. Yep, that's right. So it is a simple option.
So is there a time period when that information they've got becomes unusable? Do you think like after a year?
Yeah, like I would think if we use this, I've not thought about that question, but I'm just thinking about our obligations in terms of ensuring our stuff's current. I think if it's a repeating relationship that we've used one of these reliance form for, I think we would be required to check that that reporting entity still felt it was valid and applicable a year on. Because if we were holding the documents here and using the old documents, we would be taking those steps to check that it's still relevant and applicable and things aren't expired and yeah.
So they should certify that it's current information.
We would get a second form. Yeah. We'd just get them to do it again, I think. Bearing in mind this can take longer. I've had it take up to a week, you know, so if you're sitting there with just someone that has their ID, you might as well get it. You might as well be the one to hold it there.
Just one side step from that, like when it's a family trust or a trust or whatever, it doesn't tell us that on the title. So we're actually taking the word of the client that it's not a trust.
Or
Yep.
it is a trust.
Yeah.
That's right.
it's not.
Yeah. So obviously there's some things that show us
Some
that
people
it's a
don't
trust
know.
and sometimes it's not.
And that's the silly thing, it's a pity it's not registered on the title that it is
Hmm.
a trust. It was so much simpler.
You have to wonder if they might change that at some point, particularly because of AML.
Because all that came in well before AML.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it wouldn't be that hard to name you and Joe as trustees of the
Bill
Dunn
Cobb
Family
or
Trust. Yeah.
whatever. Yeah. Okay.
So unless you have doubts about the adequacy or veracity of the information that you have obtained, you're not required to conduct enhanced customer due diligence again unless a material change in the business relationship occurs. So, you know, if you're still using your AML for the trust in its 2 years' time, unless you think that something has changed, then you don't need to conduct CDD, enhanced customer due diligence again.
Just a wee thing, just a small thing. On our listing forms, would it not be an idea to change it where you tick the box to say that it's not a trust or it is a trust and the client initials that? That might save us a lot of stress.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is this property a trust or is it privately owned or check yes or no?
Yeah.
Just like
Because
the-
that should, well, yes,
the
I
GST.
think, yeah, yes, I think we can add something in there that
Yeah,
gives
it's
you
just
that
like the
option.
GST, it's a
Well, we
tick.
just do client type thing, individual, joint partnership, company, trust, other, and then that aligns with
Yeah.
that too.
Well, do you know that sometimes people don't know what's in a
That's
trust?
right.
That lady
Yeah.
that I'm trying to list that engineering business, I said, well, she said, well, why have you got to go through our solicitors? I said, because I said the trust is a 98% shareholder.
Yeah.
And she goes, no, it's not. I said, well, I can assure you, I said, according to company records, I said, which we've just searched,
Which have to be up to date every year, updated.
and she honestly didn't know.
But at least they're signing to say it's not area and it's
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, they don't know.
No.
Yeah, that's right. I found it really interesting on the training because I can't remember the blooming percentage now because it was a while ago, but some huge percentage of our property in New Zealand is actually owned by trusts, and yet they fall into, I don't know, it was well over 40. It was a lot. And yet they all fall into enhanced due diligence, which just seems ridiculous because most of them are just basic family trusts that are set up to look after people's assets and protect them. So it'd be great if there was two different kind of tranches there, but there's not. Enhanced due diligence is not just trust. This is a reminder. So it can be for the following circumstances. So a non-resident client from a country without sufficient AML practices, a company with nominee shareholders or shares in bearer forms, a politically exposed person, a person seeking to conduct a complex, unusually large transaction or unusual patterns of transactions that have no apparent visible economic or lawful purpose. Any other client that you assess based on your risk assessment and standard customer due diligence to be of high money laundering risk. So in bold there is a reminder that our responsibility is not limited to just the onboarding stage. If red flags arise during the relationship, action must be taken, and you should speak to myself immediately. So that's where all the onboarding goes really smoothly. You're a month into your campaign, little weird things start happening and start adding up, and you think that doesn't line up with our discussions at the start. All of a sudden there's some other person here that seems to be the one making all the calls that you've not conducted AML on, or any little thing that you just think this isn't usual. That's where we need to start possibly looking a little bit deeper and looking into a transaction, what's happening there.
Can I just ask a quick question?
Yes.
So, going back to what you said about this 20-year-old,
Yeah.
all of a sudden you wonder where the wealth comes. He turns around and he says, oh, my parents gave me the money.
Yeah.
And then, so you're sailing along, like you just said, and then it turns out that the parents are actually dodgy.
Yeah.
Now, we haven't done AML on the parents. So
Yep.
where do we stand on that?
Well, it's really hard to say it as a blanket statement,
Yeah.
because what we'll get to in a minute is how to identify red flags. It's not necessarily, so it's compounding red flags are increasing the risk as we go. So you might have one 20-year-old that has that and they say, oh, well, I got it from my parents and they own a supermarket somewhere. So that's information that you can probably verify. Because you could go and search and find out, or you might know the parents or whatever. So that then becomes explained, and yes, it's a red flag, and we've thought about it and we've considered it. We've gone to find additional information about it. We're satisfied that it's true, to as far as we can tell, right?
Yeah.
Versus the parents then become dodgy. You've had an additional red flag because it was a red flag for you to start with that he had got his money from his parents at that age, and while you'd found out, you'd gone and looked into that. Okay, first of all, you're satisfied. Then you find out the parents are actually the ones controlling everything, and they become an additional red flag. That's when you and I would start discussing and going through the information, seeing what we can verify, seeing what we can't verify, and deciding whether or not we think it is bad enough to do a suspicious activity report.
Yeah, because there's a lot of difference between hearsay and facts, isn't there?
Yes,
You know.
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what can we verify
Yeah.
versus, well, we can't bloody verify anything. Well, are we better to cover our own ass and do a anonymous suspicious activity report? It's done. That's it. We move on. Each instance has to be assessed on its own merits, and that's why there's no blanket answer, unfortunately.
What's an anonymous?
So we're required to report if we have suspicious activity that we can't find legitimate kind of reasons for. We have 3 working days to submit a report to the police
Oh, yeah.
that we believe it's suspicious and why.
Why? How is it anonymous? Because it doesn't come from us.
Well, it does come from us, but it doesn't get given to the person that it came from us. Yeah. So if we are enabling someone to be in a transaction and they get found to be money laundering, let's say their lawyer reports them, the police then investigate, and it's shown that there were red flags that we should have picked up and didn't pick up, or we ignored or chose not to address or looked at and didn't do a report, then we can get prosecuted for that. The other one,
Risk would just outsource the bloody thing.
you can't outsource it. It all comes down to me doing it. Can't be outsourced.
No, but if you used a independent,
Well, yes, but that still falls with us because you thought, oh, this one seems a bit risky and dodgy. Well, they're going to say why. And why didn't you report it? I know. So the other one that we keep...
do the AML, we'll give it to somebody else to do.
Yeah, but even still, you're the one with the relationship with the client. And if you've got compounding risk, red flags that are coming up that you do nothing about, that still falls to us. It doesn't fall to the one person that did the AML at the onboarding stage. It comes back to us.
Seems a bit unfair.
But that's only for red flags after the fact.
Yes, yeah, that's right. The other one, just keep in mind why I sent out my email about the deposits and stuff now, because we want the exact amount, because there's a suspicious activity report, which is when things are red flags and don't add up, or you're just not sure, things are off, they're compounding. Or there's the suspicious transaction report where there's a deposit and someone pays, sorry, I paid an extra 5K. And there's no reason why we can see that they've done that. So, for example, I've had one in the past where the purchase price was reduced. So after the fact, so the purchaser just went and looked at their sale and purchase agreement. They saw 10% of the purchase price, they put through that amount. That's fine. That makes sense to me that they've made an error and looked at the wrong figure. If it was more than, probably a couple of K, we'd have to report it anyway. And that's why I'm really, really strict on people making sure they're only paying the right amount, because it should be reported whether or not we actually think that there's a genuine intention to deceive or money launder or whatever. That's why we don't accept cash, blah, blah, blah. The other thing that we're having to do, Russian sanction checks. So under the Russian Sanctions Act 2022, we must, if we think we have a Russian client, so maybe their name or where they live, or they really like vodka, I don't know, wear a funny hat, then we have to check them against the Russian sanctions checklist and make sure that they're not in there. There's actually not that many. There's less people than I thought on the Russian sanctions checklist. I had a little look. Haven't dealt with any Russian clients. Doubt that we probably will, but here I am telling you about it anyway because I'm required to train
Just
you on
pass
that.
them on to Dave.
Yeah, sure. The client risk assessment. The next thing we have to do is each client must now be assessed and a risk designation provided to them, which is on here. The bottom of the sheet, and that's the bit I will also be doing, and this is where it will require us to just have a little chat about your client so I know where we're at. Most people should be low to medium risk, but things that we'd be looking at is if they are from a country that has bad or low AML processes and policies in their country. They're changing all the time. Like China's isn't very good. It's only about a 60 out of 100, whereas ours is about 78 or something. If there's a complex ownership structure, so things like a trust, obviously that becomes a different risk profile, or there's any compounding red flags. So I had an example of they were a landlord that we were managing, and they had bought it through Mal, and then they were on selling it 9 months later. We'd never met them. They were based in Auckland. There was just like a few weird things that I was like, maybe they are money laundering. I don't know. I don't know them from a bar of soap. So I spoke to Mal. Thankfully, it wasn't a trust, so I had to do the enhanced due diligence anyway, and then got the information. So the solicitor sent me through their information. They actually provided all their financial statements from the trust. He provided me with what the jobs were. So one actually was a doctor and one was some other kind of professional job, which I was able to verify by looking up searching their names in the region. So it turns out I didn't need to be suspicious of them, but that is an example of when I've gone and investigated it further so that I can prove to the DIA, well, I did actually have a couple of red flags there, and that's why I've decided not to report it, because I was able to verify that, yes, he is a doctor at such and such hospital, blah, blah, blah.
And just a wee sidestep, Charlotte, when we have deposits coming in,
Yeah.
and like in the case of Indians for a start, or Chinese, they often say, oh, we've got money coming from China, then suddenly, or India, and then suddenly the deposit arrives in the trust account. Now, is there any requirements for us under AML for that?
Yes. If it's coming from another country, yes. Yes.
Obviously, we're aware of that.
Yeah.
Right.
So I would, as a policy, we don't actually accept any overseas transactions as a company. So
No, what I'm saying is though the money can come from China to the person, will that have been AML'd on the way through? or not?
yes.
It would have been.
Yes. So any large sums that are ending up in a bank account here should be having AML done on them.
As they come into the country.
Yeah. So my biggest thing, if you've got a situation where you've got an overseas person purchasing, bearing in mind it is much harder for them to do now, without, likely they are a
But they
resident
can
or
be
a...
living here, but their parents still.
That's right, yeah. So my preference is that it goes through their solicitor. Always is the first thing. You pay your solicitor, they sort it out, then you can get them to pay us. Because then we know, as a company, that money has already been tracked. They've already had to do a transaction report to the DIA for getting that money. And there's steps in place that's a buffer between that money coming from China to us. So
That's only if we know about it, of course.
if we know about it,
Yeah.
yeah. I've never once received money directly from, say, China or
That-
anything to a trust
The
account.
question I asked was, remember I had Indian people signed up, or trying to get them signed up on Martin Street a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
And then they decided overnight they wouldn't continue because
Yeah.
they needed some more money. Oh, but we might come back to you if we get some money from India.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
even at that point,
Yeah.
if the money was coming from the bank, you're saying so long as it comes through the bank, it's fine.
Yeah.
But if we know it went from India, well, it couldn't go from India
I think
directly
it'd have to
the
come to
To
a New
us.
Zealand denominated bank first, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
It wouldn't have to. They could do it directly to ours. They could, but as a policy, as a company, we don't accept it. Yeah. Yeah. Same as cash.
It's just
Because
something I thought I'd
Yeah.
throw up. I thought about that.
yeah, it is a bit. I would have to look into if you knew it was coming from another country to their New Zealand bank account and then to us.
Or even a top up, like they said they had money, they had a house, but the 400 they wanted to buy another one.
Yeah.
Wasn't going to the
I'd have
account.
to look into that in a specific situation, I think. If it ever happens, come and let me know and we'll work
Yeah,
out what we
Of
do.
course, you only know about it if they happen to say, oh, and what if
Yeah.
it's, and you used to hear it a lot, but not so much.
Not so
now.
much now, yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
A lot of that money, they have, China and India, they both have a family member, usually an uncle, who controls the finances of the
That's
whole
right.
clan.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And Muslim families often too.
When I was at
Yeah.
Harcourt's, when I dealt with, I had a wave of Chinese to deal with. I talked to Uncle,
Yeah.
and I heard that more than once.
Yeah.
But then you've got to think, well, is this a loan or is this a gift? Is Uncle charging interest? How are they going to get the money back to Uncle?
and where did Uncle get the money from?
Yeah, and where did Uncle get it from? I mean, at the end of the day, we've got no control over Uncle's activities.
That's right.
Well,
Yeah.
you'd have to do the AML and Oakwood.
If they were selling it and they owned it and they said to you that, oh, actually they're acting on behalf of, then that automatically is a red flag. If you know that financially they're not the one that has put up the money and they are kind of like, oh, I'm doing it for someone else, well, massive red flag, enhanced due diligence, certainly. That could snowball.
So, say we're in this situation and Uncle's funding a purchase, yeah, do we have to ask them, is this a loan, an
No.
interest?
Well, not
No?
from an AML perspective, no.
Right, okay. Well then, if we don't have to ask that question, then Uncle's not in the
That's-
spectrum. For,
That's right. It comes down to selling.
yeah.
Yeah. It's because when we're conducting AML on our clients,
Yeah.
there are, we'll get to that in a minute, but yes,
Example in your case is a purchaser. Not the vendor.
yeah. So red flags. We must have annual red flag training, and we can refer to the real estate agents, money laundering and terrorism financing risk summary document. Here you go, everybody.
Well, we read it in our, as part of our,
Some of you did, not everybody.
We
So,
should be charging for this.
things. Who, me?
No.
Yeah, no, damn right I should
Yeah,
be.
well, we
Yeah.
should all be. We all added up on hours spent on this bloody rubbish.
Wow, you don't want to know how much we actually have to pay out for our audits, etc.
Yeah.
So, real estate, regardless of where you are in the country, you're inherently medium to high risk, as we facilitate the transfer of large amounts of funds for property which appreciates in value over time, making it seem like legitimate gains. We must always be on the lookout for red flags. These help us form a risk assessment on our client for the current transaction, but also help us form a picture of their position for any future transactions that may or may not be out of character, as we touched on. Ways to money launder. Property can be developed, improved upon, or renovated with the work funded from illicit funds, i.e. Jimmy Bob is a drug dealer, gets $10,000 a week in cash. He comes to Harry, buys a house off Harry, uses his cash to do up his property, then flicks it on 2 months later at a profit. Harder to know, obviously, but, when he first buys it off you, he might say, oh, it's going to take me a year to turn this around, and 2 weeks later he's ready to go, whatever. Little things like that. Loans or mortgages paid with illicit funds, we'd see that maybe those funds might be mingled with legitimate funds to avoid detection. Bearing in mind some of these are, like this is for real estate, but it also is covering off some other industry kind of stuff as well. Commercial or investment real estate purchase using illicit funds, and then that earns an incremental income every month, which then appears to be legitimate. That's another way. Purchase price can be manipulated between a complicit purchaser and vendor. So if someone wants to sell, they're happy to sell it 100K under what you actually think it's worth. Well, that's a red flag. Alternatively, a purchaser who seems really well informed wants to spend an extra 200K purchasing it. Maybe they're actually in business illicitly outside of this property transfer and are using that as a way to transfer funds between each other. So each risk or red flag does not operate in isolation, but in combination with the others. Where 2 or more indicators or red flags apply, the level of money laundering risk compounds. So that's going to flow back to us on our client risk assessment. I'm going to say, Mike might have no red flags, so I'm not concerned about him, but Bill actually starts lighting up all these red flags along the way, and that then goes from being probably low risk to high risk, in which case we either have to do enhanced due diligence, complete a report, or in worst case example, actually cease working for them. And if you're aware of red flags, you must discuss it with me immediately, as we are required to report these suspicious activity reports within 3 working days of a reasonable ground for suspicion being formed. So it's not a lot of time. Not a lot of time for us to investigate it and look into it. And that's how quickly it must happen. So don't muck around. If you've got things that are compounding, come and talk to me. Red flags for real estate purchases. So the appearance of manipulation of the appraisal or valuation of the property, as I just talked about. Other gatekeepers such as accountants or lawyers or unknown persons appearing to have control of an activity, as we've talked about. Property flipping, where it's being sold in quick succession, including 2 related parties or with rapidly increasing value. Purchase and use of commercial real estate inconsistent with business purpose. So, you might have a commercial client that has an industrial property and all of a sudden they're buying an office space. Well, that's actually not that uncommon if they're doing it as an investment, but that's why you have to look at things in isolation with themselves, their personal situation. Sale and purchase price is significantly undervalued or well above. The settlement date is far in the future. Yeah, that one I'm less sure about why. Sight unseen property purchases without a logical explanation. That toots back to the one I was just talking about before, with people into a tapiri buying stuff and never met them, and so I started to, had to investigate that further. Use of a complex loan structure or credit finance, such as loan back schemes. The payment, so here you'll see a real estate sale doesn't go unconditional, but we get the funds through as a deposit. Yep, that's happened before. So that can be, because all it takes is someone's 30K hitting our deposit and bouncing back out for that money to be laundered. That's actually, is that one step into our account. Well, not even to the wrong person. They've all of a sudden got a reason for that 30K to be sitting in their account. Yeah. So, because I can't see what account that's been paid from. I'm paying it back to the one they've instructed me to pay it to. Or we might be able to reverse it, but you can see how easily that happens. Payments received in cash, that's why we do not receive cash payments. Payments that don't, in the trust account, that don't align with what are expected. So that's, as I discussed before, they've accidentally paid an extra 20K. Oh, whoops, sorry, I put the 2 in the wrong place. Well, that's a red flag. Payments such as a deposit received from persons other than the purchaser. So that does happen sometimes, but usually there'd be the ones that I mainly see, and it's quite easy for us to explain, is either from a lawyer's, which, makes sense, that happens quite often, or if it's an individual purchasing and the company that they own is actually the one paying the deposit, that can happen vice versa. That's easy for me to understand. That's not suspicious because I know that people that own a company, whatever. Anyone else, if it was a random name, we'd probably have to question as to why that's come from such and such to get a bit of an idea of whether it's legitimate or not. Request to hold funds in a trust account for a longer time than is required by the conditions of the sale. Transactions occur through a trust account of another professional, for example, a law firm, in circumstances that are not expected. I don't know what the circumstances wouldn't be expected there. Anyone that I've had, it's always made sense that they've sold a property and are buying through us, and the deposit's been sitting in their trust account. Unexplained or late changes in payment arrangements or unexplained use of virtual assets. That's one thing. I won't talk about that today because it's obviously quite a hefty training, but we do have to put more strict, I don't think we have any in there, reference to digital currencies and the extra steps that we'd have to take. So if we get paid by digital currencies, then we have to have a whole policy around that, but we wouldn't accept payment via digital currencies. I don't even know how that works. But anyway, we'll get to that another day.
And I guess if they were paying you in a foreign currency, you'd somehow need to make...
Yeah, we talked about that earlier, Huey. So we actually won't accept them. So if anyone ever wants to do that, it needs to go through their lawyer.
NZ bank account.
Yeah, and then that's exactly right. I'm not going to go through the commercial leasing one, Harry, because it's only really relevant to you, but please do take the time to read it.
Through,
yeah, that'd be good. What they've said in this document, that the advice is that it usually requires the lessor and the lessee to both be complicit for it to really be, I don't know. That's what they've said. Customer red flags. Okay, these ones are pretty straightforward. Someone who appears to avoid face-to-face meetings. They're here, they're hard to catch up with, they're, giving you... Yeah, that's true. They're reluctant to provide ID or behaves nervously. Customer is buying or selling property from overseas without a logical explanation. For example, they have dealings in New Zealand but no indication of being in New Zealand or intention to come to New Zealand. Someone who appears to be acting, which is what we've just talked about as well, on someone else's instructions without disclosing the identity, so maybe they're a bit cagey or weird about them. They have unexplained wealth that appears to be inconsistent with their socio-economic profile. For example, Joe blogs that works at Countdown, he's 20 and he's, got a $3 million property. Well, that's probably a little bit interesting. They require it to be the real estate agency work to be completed with unexplained urgency. Customer offers to pay an extraordinary fees disproportionate to the services requested, because to them, if they're managing to launder $300,000, they're paying you $60K commission to get you to shut up and get it done. Well, that's nothing to them, because what they've actually just walked away with is $240,000 of clean money that previously was not clean. So they're not spending $60K, they're making $240. So that's the kind of thing there. A customer whose instructions are unusual with no apparent visible or economic purpose. I'm not, I can't think of a current example for that, but I guess if someone, wants to just get it sold and they're willing to lose $100K off what you think it's worth. They're known or identified to have criminal links. I think we've talked about the situation that happened when Teresa was working. I think it was Harcourts out in Matoda, and a guy came along. He was apparently wearing all red, made an unconditional cash offer, bought the property, settled on the property 2 weeks later, came back to the same agent. I can't remember what the guy's name is. It's the guy, probably shouldn't dob him in anyway, but same agent 2 weeks later, we're actually moving now. We're moving up north. Need you to sell that property again. Oh yeah, just the same money, whatever. Yep, get it done. That, to me, that just screams red flag. Like, this guy is money laundering. First of all, he's wearing all red and he lives in Matoda. Like, I'm sorry to discriminate, but he's probably in the mob, first of all. Second of all, his plans change in 2 weeks. He's made an unconditional offer that's settled within 2 weeks. That in itself's kind of unusual, unless it's maybe an investor or that they've already sold and they need a new property to move into. All of those things. That's an actual example that happened not far away, that, to be honest, if that salesperson had been dobbed in, which probably should have been, then...
Probably Lloyd Anderson, was it?
I can't remember his name. We'll have to ask Teresa. She probably won't tell us, seeing it's now recorded on here. Anyway, so customer terminates a relationship quickly and unexpectedly. You sell the house, they're gone, never hear from them again. This one goes without saying, their documents look fraudulent. Involvement of businesses that are not normally cash intensive but appear to have substantial amounts of cash. Unusual involvement of third parties without clear or legitimate explanation for their involvement. So that does happen sometimes. There's sometimes a random family member that's hanging around and seems to have a lot of sway and input. So that is a red flag, and that's where we need to just ask a few more questions and determine, why are they around? Well, actually, my uncle's around because my dad's out of the country and my husband's recently died and I'm not sure how it all works. Okay, well, that's a legitimate example of why someone else that's shouldn't be directly involved necessarily seems to be having a lot of opinion. Or you ask me and I say, you're just giving me some advice, I guess. That is then a red flag that we think, is there anything else there that's making us wonder about the legitimacy of this
I
transaction?
think the question to ask there is, does the hanger-on have any financial input into this property? That is the question to ask, isn't it?
Yeah.
And if they say no, well, then you can dismiss red flag, move on, to some degree.
Yeah, to some degree. Again, it's the same thing, as every situation has to be looked at as its own situation. Yeah. Because if that's the case and there's been no other red flags and everything else, the ownership structure is really straightforward and there's nothing else, then yeah, you're probably right. But if there's another red flag that has cropped up that initially didn't seem like a red flag, but then in hindsight, when you've got this other information, they do compound, and then we think, no, maybe there is something going on here. But again, we have to look at them all.
And really, let's face it, vendors and purchasers aren't always truth tellers.
That's right. And particularly if they're doing, our money laundering, well, they're not going to tell you the truth. They'll be cagey and weird, probably. Okay, red flag specific to vendors. They know the purchaser, or they appear to know the purchaser and may be colluding to create a legitimate transaction. We've talked about that. Customer is willing to accept offer well below current market value. or disinterested in obtaining a better price. That's a good one. You've got two competing offers and they accept an offer that's 40k less with, you know, I don't know, some conditions versus an unconditional one. Things like that. It's unencumbered without explanation for this, including where a mortgage has been paid off rapidly. That's probably more relating to banks, but hard for us to tell whether or not a mortgage has been paid off rapidly. Property is resold after significant renovation without evidence of source of funding the renovation project. Yeah, not always a red flag, but maybe in conjunction with other stuff it might be. In purchases, payments of deposits or funds from third parties, we've talked about that. The property being purchased is inconsistent with the socio-economic profile, I've talked about that. Use of nominees or complex structures for the purchase of the property. Again, some of that's probably more relevant when it comes to the solicitors. As we know, if and or nominees is ticked, we might not even know who's buying it at the end. What's this? Oh, so this is just when the risk factors do increase. If customers are onboarded remotely and we never meet them face to face, you don't have actual contact with the customer. If it's all through an intermediary, then that's probably a little bit dodgy, or it certainly increase the risk. Or the products or the services provided to a person in overseas jurisdiction, and that's when we're again checking the country profiles and risk factors, etc. That's it for today.
You're looking tired.
I am tired. This has been hanging over my head, and this is only part of it. But these are the main things that are going to be impacting you. Other things that we'll run through, there's changes that I have to make in the background. I mean, I'm not going to lie, it sucks, but it is what it is. So I've got some documents here. So there's a CDD reliance form for you to have. I'll email everything out and I'll put them on Property Suite 2. There's the AML review forms that you can have a look over. I've not finished the compliance document changes, but I've got our risk assessment with the changes noted. I will send it out once I've finished the compliance program, so you've got the up-to-date. Mike also has to sign all those changes off, so where I've got the blue, we've had to update things.
A lot of work overall. I was just going to say though, just to interrupt, Charlotte.
Please.
This is in Riverton when that guy purported to sell that property.
I was thinking about that.
He didn't own it, and he got this queer real estate agent to put a sign up, didn't he?
Yeah, I've been conversing with these people about selling the section, and it was his in-laws who live way in the back blocks of the United States. But he said that he'd just come back from them and said, oh, you know, what's it worth? Give me another up-to-date appraisal. So I did that, and I communicated with Chris and Christina, and then I went round there one day and he was a tall poppy sign on it. And I went, I went back and I said to Chrissy, oh, hi Chrissy, just touching base. I said, oh.
Are they the vendors?
Yeah.
They were the family of vendors, but dealing through them because the parents were non-contactable. They lived in, I don't know, Grand Canyon or somewhere. And so I said, tall poppy sign. I'd done all the paperwork for them, and I went round there, and she came back the next day and she went, what? Tall poppy sign up? No, that's not us. And I went round and took a photo of it, and I sent it to her, and she got Chris on the go. Chris came back 2 days later. He said, I've been to Tall Poppy in Invercargill. One of the agents there had received a phone call, got all the AML over the phone, married it all up, away he went.
Put a sign up, not with them.
And so he went.
So did he just put the sign up at the wrong property, or?
No. So Chris, after he talked to Tall Poppy in Invercargill, went straight to the top to Wellington, and he said they coughed and spluttered, and the procedures, that AML procedures, sounded like to me, the AML procedures weren't correctly in place. And the solicitor never picked it up because there was a solicitor involved. Anyway, so Chris said, don't worry, you're getting it, we're just going to row back for a couple of months. And so what's happening is they're actually getting, not that it's got anything to do with this, but the follow-up on that is they're getting it out of the parent's name into Chris and Christine's name, so it's easier for me to deal with.
That's right, yeah.
But Chris was absolutely appalled, and he doesn't look around, Chris, he's straight on the blower.
So that would have been
It's a very
somebody
strange
waiting for the
situation.
deposit to come in for the dodgy lawyers. And would have run off with the money.
Yes, plus the other side of that was,
Amazing, isn't
there
it?
was a buyer there, and that's how they connected them together, just to be together.
Good Lord.
It's interesting to know actually though,
I've got to
this,
excuse myself, I've got an appointment.
That's right, Ellen.
this is now